Tamar Sagiv, welcome to Cultural Attache.
Hi, nice to meet you, and thank you so much for having me.
We're here to talk about your album that just came out called Shades of Morning, which is a remarkable album that I encourage everyone to hear.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Before we get started talking about the album, I know that at the age of 12 you saw a video of Jacqueline Dupree and that really influenced you. And something she said I wanted to ask you about, which is playing the cello is a journey of self-discovery and self-expression.
Hmm.
How would you describe the journey that led to the creation and the recording of Shades of Morning?
Oh wow, that's such a beautiful point. I didn't even think about that. Yeah, I think I came from a very from a classical musician tradition, and classical music tends to be very rigid. You know, it has all these rules and all these things that are accepted and sometimes not accepted, and the way you perform and the way that you interpret the music, and so for most of my life, this is what I was doing. And then when I started writing my own music. I think that's when I found my own expression. I had to, before that, I had to stay in the lines of what was given to me and is in what was accepted in terms of interpretation. And that's a whole artistry on its own. But but when I started writing my own music, I definitely was more connected to myself and to what I wanted to express and how I was seeing the world and how was interacting with people around me. So
There's a lyric that John Lennon wrote, which is life is what happens when you're busy making other plans. And I know that the composition of Shades of Morning began when you were at your grandmother's deathbed and you started writing them, writing that particular piece, the title track, which opens the album. Tell me about your grandmother and what she meant to you.
So my grandmother, who I was very close to, my grandparents were like my parents, and she was a very strong woman, and she really taught me discipline. She was very, very disciplined, and she loved classical music. And she had like a little workshop, like a room where she was knitting and making things and making dolls or bags or whatever from materials that I don't even know what they were, like recycling materials that she would find. And she would always have the radio on with classical music, like with the classical music stations. So there was always like a Brahms symphony or a Tchaikovsky symphony playing. And when I was a child, I would always see her work and listening to music. And so music was really important for her, and she loved music. And I think that she also loved the fact that I was playing the cello, that I was a classical musician. Um, and when she was dying, it was a surprise. We didn't know it's going to happen, but it took a while. One day I took a flight back home, and when I landed, I was told that she was rushed to the hospital, and then it was a few weeks that we went through that she slowly passed away. And I was next to her most of the time, and it was very difficult because seeing someone you love dying and seeing them suffer, and that's heartbreaking. And sometimes there is nothing you can really do. And for me, the composition aspect of it, I just started composing because I needed to express, to journal in a way. And that was me journaling. And I actually, the day she died, I don't know how much of it she knew or what was going on around her. Um, but I had the beginning written down and I played it for her next to her bed. And I hoped that she knew that that she will be remembered in this way with music, and that was really important for me.
Yeah, it's a tough process being there when somebody you care about passes away, isn't it?
Yeah, it's terrible. Yeah.
That's what I related to in the music because I've lost a number of people in my life. And so
Oh,
I felt the whole process of the album, which is why I wanted to talk to you.
yeah.
Um, what do you think your grandmother would say about this recording if she could hear it?
Oh, wow. I don't know. I was the past few days have been crazy. The album went out and I've been I started writing it really 3 years ago, so it's been a 3 year process and it's been a long time. Um and I definitely wished I wished she were here. She was here to listen to it and to know what happened with it. And I hear a lot of comments from people of how much they connect to the music, and I think that would have meant a lot for her. um and yeah, I it's hard to say. I want to hope that she would love the music. She didn't really hear my music before, so that was kind of a new thing for me to write music when she died. And it's fine to think of this as like this was born from death, really. But yeah, I hope she would have loved it.
Well, you were able to journal through your composition and through, I'm sure, through the performance and the recording process. But if this process started 3 years ago, you've been in this world of grief and mourning for 3 years. And I'm wondering how you've taken care of yourself through that whole process.
Oh, that's such a good question. Um, a few days ago, I just told my friend I think that throughout this whole time, I had this expectation that when the album will go out, I will feel relieved. Um, and I didn't, and it was kind of a of a discovery. Um, and I think what helped me take care of myself was music. I know that I was listening constantly to music, and I was making music, I was writing music, and these compositions, most of them, I didn't think they would see the light of day. I thought I was just writing for myself, and to think that it, that people really listen to them and that they really love them and that they mean something to someone else, um, that has a life on its own. And I feel so honored and connected to people that are able to connect to it. And yeah, I think it's like I feel like it's such an honor for me to get that, to be able to connect to people in this way.
Does this experience and the ultimate release of Shades of Morning want you to do something that goes in another direction that is, more contemplative or more joyful or more frenetic or whatever path you want to take yourself down?
Like after the release or
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming if you started writing this 3 years ago, and I know the timeline it takes between writing and producing an album before it comes out, so I'm assuming you've already gone down another path.
Yeah, I did. Um, and and now it's also a question of whether it's the right path or not. Someone has said to me that it's going to be a hard life to live if I will forever be the morning cellist. Uh, and I'm thinking, I think that mourning and like grief, it's like a part of our life that you cannot take away. Like it's always going to be there, and in so many different ways. Even if a person doesn't die, like it's the grief is always there. um but I think that there is so many other aspects of life that I want to explore through music. And yeah, I hope that that's, that I will get to do that, that people will also receive it. Yeah.
There's a famous doctor, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who came up with the 5 stages of death: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I'm wondering if you feel like you went through those stages and if you feel that Shades of Morning represents those 5 stages, or are there more? I know you have 9 pieces on the album, and they don't all live in the same space. So, do you feel like that theory of the 5 stages of grief, is somehow reflected in Shades of Morning?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I was, going through the stages. And I think the Shades of Morning, more than it was talking about my grandmother, and obviously a lot of my, like most of my personal experiences. I cannot write about someone else's. Um, but um, but there were so many different stages to other ideas of grief. And Yeah, so definitely there were a lot of stages, and I think that the I also, when I recorded the album and I was thinking about the album and when I was writing the pieces, I wanted them to tell a story from the beginning to the end. And I was the story that I felt was right at the time was that, grief doesn't really go away. It always stays in some way or another. And, life continues and they continue in a certain way, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Um, and just that grief always stays with you in a way.
I also feel that it because I lost my mother when I was 36. Um, and I feel cheated. And I used to think that I would get over the grief or I would get over the sense of loss. And then I realized if I did, that meant the love went away.
I didn't think about that. That's very beautiful. And so true. Yeah. I can completely relate to that actually. That you feel that like that if you can hold on to the grief, then you hold on to something that was still there.
And I don't even feel like I need to hold on to the grief. I just know that it comes in that love and grief are intertwined.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
You mentioned that you wanted to build a story through the music, and if you listen closely, you can hear that it's about more than just your grandmother. I mean, in particular, you have the tracks Roots and Imaginary World. And Roots, of course, refers, I believe, to your having, been born and raised in Israel,
Right. Yes.
which is an area that's going through profound loss, as is that whole area,
That's all of
particularly Gaza right now. And then towards the end of the album, you have Imaginary World, where you're looking forward to a world where there's always peace. Do you feel that what you've put out into the world now is a musical commentary on what's going on in the world, and
it.
that there may be better ways than what's going on?
Absolutely, 100%. I think that was I most of the pieces in the album actually were written right after October 7th. And you go through that and then you go through the war and then you go through um seeing what's going on in the other side and while you are still experiencing what's going on with your side and it's and you're thinking like why do we even have sides? We're all human. And um and one of the things that was really important for me in the album was that I was thinking a lot, specifically in Roots, which I think is the most aggressive, maybe, piece that I wrote in the album. Um, it was really important for me to think about humanity and how much beauty we can create. Because at the time, there was so much aggressiveness and so much violence, and there is still a lot of aggressiveness and violence and cruelty. And I was thinking that as humans, we can create all of that, which is insane sometimes to think about what we can do to each other. And at the same time, we can also create beautiful things and we can also treat each other with beauty and like we can also do good things to the world. And for me, the album, I really wanted to say, I choose to do something that is beautiful because there is so as just one person in this world, sometimes you can't do much. And it's not just I'm talking about myself and like the Middle East because I'm from there. But I'm sure that many other people feel the same way about other things that are going on in the world and in their countries. And sometimes you feel so helpless because you're just one person, and there is so much you can do. And I felt that if I'm doing something, I want to create something beautiful. Like I want to do something that it will be good. So.
So how do you get people to understand what it is you're trying to say through your music, particularly in a world where more people stream than actually look at liner notes or anything like that? Or I have the benefit of getting a press release or something. But how do you make sure, or how do you encourage people to understand what it is you're saying through your music?
It's a very good question, and it's a question that I also struggled with when I was writing it. because I knew what that meant releasing that album, and I knew what that meant releasing it at that time. And to be honest, when I finished the album, I couldn't even imagine that the war would keep going where we are today. And I think many are like me. It was just, it's mind blowing. Like it's even more than that. And um, when I was writing the album, there was one aspect of it that I, as like an artist and as a musician, I believe that, you can relate to music in your own way. And I always feel like I don't even want to name the pieces because I want people to have their own names on the pieces, because then I feel that, they have their own story and they can connect to it in their own personal way. But then there is also like a social impact that you have to think about when you're releasing such thing. Um, for me, it was important to say like, here is grief, and here is the stages of grief that I went through as one person in the world. So many other people are still going through grief and are going through terrible things. And they will need to write about that too, and we will need to read it, and it will not be easy, and it will be very difficult and heartbreaking. But that's what like I went through, and that's how it came to be. And I was hoping that people, can put aside politics and just connect to it on the human level of what grief is. And specifically when, everyone experiences grief, um, everyone, in one way or another. So.
And every experience of grief is different. I mean, your experience now with your grandmother is going to be very different than your experience 10 or 15 years from now with somebody else who's important in your life.
Exactly. Yeah. Very, very true. Um,
In 2023, you told All About Jazz, and I found it interesting that you were interviewed by All About Jazz, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the sound of cellist Truls Mork, had been very influential for you, but you were distancing yourself from his recordings, and you said, quote, because I've been trying to find a sound that is more unique to me. Have you found that sound? And how would you describe it?
oh, I like this question. So I love Truls Mork, and it's funny because I have a lot of friends who make fun of me for loving him so much, because I can say that like if he was even playing completely out of tune, I would still love him, because I just love the sound so much and I love the vibrato so much that whatever he does, I would love the recording. Um, and I think that at a certain point, I realized that it was limiting me, the way that I was listening to him and how much I loved it. Um, and I think that when I started studying with Matt Chaimowitz, that's when he kind of like more encouraged me and showed me in a way that, that you can experiment with more things, like with more sounds, and there are so many other possibilities. Um, I don't know if I completely found it yet. I know that I'm on the way of finding it, and um I don't know if you ever find it. I think it's like a work in progress all the time. And also it's always evolving. I'm playing now on a different cello. And when I recorded this whole album, I just got that cello. Um, and it has a much brighter color than the cello I had before, and I really connect to it. And also in the recording, sometimes I remember I even tuned the cello lower than what it should be tuned. So because I wanted to reach this kind of really like grieving tone and really mellow kind of sound from it. So there's so many ways to play around, with that.
Um, how do you think if, let's say, 15 years from now, Truls Mork is looking for something new to record? How do you think he would approach Shades of Morning?
Oh, very different than me, 100%. Um, and I'm sure I would love it. And um, it's a great question, because I think also when I was writing these compositions, at the beginning of writing them, I was writing just for myself, and then I added a string trio. And I had a very clear idea of what I wanted in the stranger, and I would write it down, and I would write the dynamics, and I would write the articulations. And then we would come to the rehearsals and they would do something completely different. And I was like, oh, that actually works like much better. And then I remembered like how important it is to like to have your own character as a performer and as a player, and how important it is as a composer to accept that that people will play it completely differently than how you might play it. And so I think he would probably play with much more vibrato than me. And I can already hear it. And I hear a very like deep sound. Um, and I think that I would learn a lot from it. I would learn a lot from him, and I would learn a lot on the composition from having him play it.
Now, your interview, with All About Jazz, we're talking about you as a classical cellist, but there is a reason you did an interview with All About Jazz. Can you sort of give me a brief overview of your interest in jazz and how that influences you?
Oh, absolutely. So I came to the new school, to Mannes School of Music, actually, that is part of the new school now, to do my master's degree. And until that point, I was a completely classical cellist. I thought I was going to sit in an orchestra and do an orchestra job. And then I came to the new school, and all of a sudden, you are in a place where you hear really good jazz players and, practicing around you. And until that point, I didn't really had an ex I didn't re I wasn't really exposed to jazz in this way. I heard it here and there, but like I never really spoke to any jazz player because I would always speak to classical players, and you have like your groups. And and I remember like just sitting in the practice rooms and like hearing people practice, and I was like, wow, that's really beautiful. Like, and I never thought about that. And then a good friend of mine, who came from the jazz department, she's a pianist. Her name is Dana, and she told me, I really want to improvise with you. And I was like, me, improvisation? I don't think so. Thank you. And I put it off for a while. And then she had like the power of convincing me. And she had a concert in Smalls Jazz Club. And she said, I want you in the concert and I want us to improvise in this concert. And I was like, well, Smalls Jazz Club is cool. I've never been there. I should go. And I did. And I think rehearsed once. We tried improvising, and I wasn't like sure what the hell I was doing. And then we went on to Smalls, and we did the session and we improvised. And a few of my friends went to the concert, and I mean to the show, or in classical music we call it a concert. Um, and then a good friend of mine who is a composer, is a classical composer, told me, Tamar, I think there is something there for you. I think like you really found yourself there. Like I felt like you should really start doing this more. And so I did. And it was really interesting because Dana, my friend, came from a jazz background, and I was coming from a classical background. And all of a sudden we were improvising, and all of a sudden there was no rules. And no one was saying, well, you have to do this and this and that, or you have to start and finish, or like, there was no structure. And I really fell in love with it. And I think that's also why I felt so comfortable writing, because all of a sudden I could just break off that boundaries that were there the whole time. And um, and that's how the article All About Jazz came. And Dan and I recorded a few free improvisations that we did on stage, and we released them. And um, yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, in that same interview, interestingly, that you brought up the sense of rules just now, because you said, I believe that in order to be good at what you do and stay relevant in the music industry, you always have to reinvent yourself and break rules, especially in classical music when there are a lot of rules that can be broken. How important do you think rule breaking is for the long-term viability of classical music in the future?
Oh, I think it's very important. Um, and one thing that a lot of composers come and say right now when they hear my music and this album is that it's not contemporary enough, maybe in the way that, I didn't hit the instrument with a bunch of sounds. And still, I come from a classical background, so obviously my ear goes in a certain direction, and my mind goes in a certain direction, and the composition is affected by it. but it is not it's not really experimental music in the way that that contemporary music nowadays can be. Um, and I think that there is definitely a place for that kind of music to be made. And I did that for many years, and I will continue probably to do that as well as part of experimenting and learning new things. Um, and at the same time, I felt that we can also do something that is, in a way, taking influences from Bach and taking influences from the Beatles and taking influences from that experimental phase all at the same time. Um, and One thing that I see, I have like a TikTok account that is that a lot of young people are on, and I think that the reason that they are able to connect to this music that is very classical is that because that a lot of the influences are coming also from sometimes pop and rock and um, yeah. So reinventing this genre that so many people did already before me um, is so important for classical music to exist today, and specifically now when we see that that it's hard to sell tickets to shows um, yeah, and all at the same time, I really love the fact that that you go to the opera and people are wearing suits and you walk into this like time capsule, and that's so special. So I don't know exactly how to make everything together together, but I just know that I don't want that to be gone from the world.
Well, and also, if Bach was the gold standard by which other composers worked, Beethoven and Mozart might as well have given up. The point
Exactly.
is that, centuries later, there's a new way of hearing, a new way of expressing. So
Exactly.
you just have to see what that's going to be.
Yes, absolutely.
Um, in 2022, you had, a release called The A Train come out. And I know a lot of Shades of Morning has been about your first album and your first compositions, but I guess was that a self-release, The A
Yeah.
Train?
Yeah.
So this is considered like a label debut.
Yeah, so the A Train was actually a student project. I was still a student, and one of my professors told me, I'm giving like you need to do a project for research school. I give you an open hand, do whatever you think, just do something. And I was like, oh, I know this guy who I admire, who is like this famous trumpeter and like jazz artist, Jeremy Pelt. And I was like, Jeremy, how would you feel about writing me a classical music piece, like a cello piece? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And then I had two other composers that I knew, and they wrote pieces for it. And while I was preparing to record it, I felt, oh, maybe I should put my own voice into it. And I, at that point, already started improvising. And so I wrote these two, the first and the last piece on that. And I'm not sure if it's an album. I think it was an EP, or that's at least how it was categorized when I put it out myself independently. Um, but that really pushed me to do this album because I got so many because I saw that people are streaming it, and I was really surprised because my teachers were like, don't expect that people will stream it. Don't expect that like it's contemporary classical music, so people will probably not really hear about it. And I didn't have any expectation, and then I saw that they did, and then I thought, oh, maybe people actually like my music. So, um,
Well, I was very happy to find it, not just to hear other things that you had done, because clearly your TikTok account gives us all kinds of options to hear what you can do. But also to hear something different that Jeremy Pelt had written, because I've been following him for quite some time. I think he's so amazing.
He's incredible. Yeah, I love his music. I listen to him. And he was he was actually the reason that I listened to even to jazz. I mean, when I was working on his piece, and these vignettes that he wrote, I remember that it was really hard for me to connect to them in the beginning. And usually I didn't have a problem connecting with pieces right at that point. And I had many composers writing pieces for me before that. And I've been working with composers since I was 16. So I had like this long, journey of contemporary classical music. and it was the first piece that I kind of struggled with. And I remember coming to him a few times and I playing for him, and I saw also on his face that that maybe he felt that I needed to like to connect to it better, and I felt that as well. And one day he told me, Tamar, I think you should just listen to music, like just listen to jazz. And at that point, I didn't really know jazz. Like, I heard the name Ella Fitzgerald, I heard the name Miles Davis, but I never really sat down and listened. And I really I discovered a whole world. And it was so fun for me because when I was a child and I discovered the Brahms symphonies, so you sit there and you listen to it and you're like, oh my God, that's the most amazing thing. And you have that moment where you hear this amazing piece for the first time and you're like, wow, like you're blown away. And so the same thing happened to me with jazz, that I was listening to just masterpieces by, John Coltrane and Duke Ellington, and all of a sudden I was just blown away. And now I actually listen to jazz much more than I'm listening to classical music. And I think that has definitely influenced a lot of
If,
what I
if you haven't spent time listening to some of Gil Evans' work apart from Miles Davis,
Oh,
that's
yes.
a fun place to go.
Yes. Yeah.
The last thing I want to ask you, Tamar, is about something that Russian writer Leo Tolstoy is quoted as having said. He said, only people who are capable of loving strongly can also suffer great sorrow. But this same necessity of living serves to counteract the grief and heals them. How has writing, performing, and recording Shades of Mourning healed you?
Hmm. Um, well, I think that first of all, just having an outlet, in a way that was creative was already a big step in healing. Um, Recording the album, actually, the first piece, Shades of Mourning, was the hardest to record. I don't know if it was because of the emotional baggage that it had, or also because it's a more difficult composition because it's very gentle and like technique-wise, it's very difficult. Um, and and that I didn't find particularly healing. um, and um, but for me, I think that the past few days, since I see people and I hear people listening to the album and connect to it, that has been the most profound part of the healing. I believe, and I don't know what is healing. Like, can you heal from grief? I don't know, but um, but I do know that I find that there was a time when I was writing the album that I couldn't find anything good in the world. That I was really thinking that there is nothing. And now I see people and I think that there is so much good that people can do and be. And I think that's a very encouraging thought.
It is, absolutely. Well, I really appreciate your time, Tamar. Congratulations on Shades of Mourning, and I can't wait to see what's next.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure being here, and thank you so much for all the beautiful and thoughtful questions. I feel very honored that I got to do this with you today.